everybody, just to let you know that the session is now live and the inspector will be joining us in a moment.
Hello there, can I be seen and heard okay?
Yes, sir.
So you can, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I understand my name is going to be changing on screen shortly, in case anybody was concerned about that. Okay, let's resume. Just before we do carry on, I had a little note left on my screen to just remind everybody that there will be a fire alarm test within the council's building at 4 p.m. today. So there'll be a need to maybe take a brief pause while we do that, but we shouldn't have to take an adjournment or anything related to that. I've obviously not heard your fire alarm before, but I'm presuming it doesn't go on for too long. So okay, so where we left things before lunch, we were considering matter MIQ 7 and 9, and we were bringing that to a conclusion. So before we broke, we have 4 people who wanted to contribute on that matter. I just want to hear from those 4 people, please, rather than anybody else wanting to. I think we've heard quite a lot on matter 7, MIQ 7 and MIQ 9. So if the 4 people who wanted to speak before lunch can still wish to, if they can pop their hands up, I'll go through you in order as you appear already. Mr. Hickling, please.
Thank you, sir. I trust that's working. I'm Fraser Hickling from Phillips Planning, working on behalf of Countryside Properties and Roscon Strategic Land. If I can just raise a quick point, which hasn't been raised by others, it's regarding the contribution that could be provided by the expansion of existing allocations in the neighbourhood plans to aid the plan's flexibility. Following on from points others made regarding the discounting of the capacity of the key service centres and rural service centres, there was an opportunity for contingency planning through the identification of reserve sites much earlier in the process. Both of my clients have interest in the existing neighbourhood plan allocations at Sharnbrook and Great Barford. And in those locations, there is surplus land which has been subject to technical work on environmental capacity and sustainability. These sites could be brought forward during the planned period to bolster housing delivery if it became clear that there was to be a delay in the infrastructure. The ability of the existing communities as well to assimilate growth has, in our experience, been underestimated, with those communities being proactive in engaging with the development process. In our view, the potential to expand such sites to support flexibility has not been sufficiently examined as part of the plan-making process. The shift of position that there can now be discretion in respect to the step trajectory also does not appear consistent with the fundamental arguments in support of the selected spatial strategy. In respect of mitigating the risks in delivery that have been discussed, there is no plan B as stated by the Council, and therefore we believe the plan as submitted has not been positively prepared and may ultimately not be effective in the longer term in meeting the borough's housing need in full. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Before we move on to the next contributor, we have Nicola Gribble on screen. Can you hear me, Nicola Gribble? Hello. Would you mind turning your video off, please?
I'm trying.
Oh, so if you go down to the, yep, you got it. You got it.
Perfect.
Thank you for that. And if you could mute yourself as well. The only reason I ask it just allows me to focus on the people who are speaking. I'm sure you don't want
absolutely.
So you don't want me looking at your background anyway. Thank you. Ms. Smith, please.
Thank you, sir. Sarah Smith from Raptures, representing Taylor Wimpey. I'm just going to respond in relation to the flexibility point. And very simply, our answer is no. Our evidence to the Regulation 19 sets out our arguments clearly, and I would agree with a number of many of the earlier contributors' comments in relation to the lack of flexibility in the strategy. I just would like to draw out a couple of points in relation to that, though, if I may. The failure of the delivery of the infrastructure raises serious questions about whether the locations chosen are then the most sustainable. I draw your attention, as David Forvigue did, to Table 5.2 in the IDP, which references the reliance of the key infrastructure being delivered up front. And I'd also just add in relation to that, yesterday evening we had a late paper sent through ED32, I think, in relation to the water situation.
Yep.
And I think that also that's another key infrastructure point.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so that's later on in the agenda. We have an item specifically to address that.
Yes, that's fine. I'm not actually talking to that, but I was just referencing that as another part of key major infrastructure that has an implication on the strategy. Okay. Thirdly, as you've heard, the council admits there's no plan B beyond seeing what development can come forward in advance of the key infrastructure. And so I'd make the point on this, that to encourage people to make sustainable travel choices, sustainable infrastructure has to be in from day one, not after X years or X number of houses have already been built. And also on that point, I'm not aware that there have been any testing of early delivery of the transport from a transport point of view. I'd also make the point that throughout the whole local plan process, there have been indications of continued delay and uncertainty. For example, Oxcam Arc and obviously East, the infrastructure points that we're talking about today. And it seems to us that the EWR timetable has been taken at face value with little interrogation about the potential delay, and we find that rather perplexing, and it's not an effective way to plan major development delivery. Just picking up on the point of the fact that this is an early review of the 2030 plan, and that plan was devised because similar issues around uncertainty of key planks of the planning strategy, in that case housing numbers and the Oxcam Arc implications. This time, of course, it's the uncertainty around infrastructure delivery timescales. And so effectively, what we see is the 40% increase in housing has been squeezed into the last 10 years, precisely what the council said they couldn't do in the previous review. We do not consider that another early review of the plan is the right way to go. This is the enforced early review of the 2030 plan. To have a strategy that is inflexible as this is, as Mr. Easton said, is not effective and is not how we should be planning for major development needs. I think the plan is unsound by definition in that point. One point that nobody has touched on, and I do want to raise, and we talk about it quite extensively in our Regulation 19 representations, with specific reference to Appendix A in that context, is the point of viability of the strategy. I think is also in question. The council's own viability study notes that Little Barford, for example, is not deliverable on current day values and costs, but only on growth assumptions that are unrealistic and overly optimistic. A number of points have been made about the trajectory, which we could concur, and the fact that the Lichfield start to finish report of 2020 identifies the 160 on average, 160 dwellings per annum, for schemes of greater than 2,000 dwellings. Of course, we're being asked to accept trajectory well in advance of that. I think uncertainty and unrealistic assumptions are two of the biggest factors over the delivery of the infrastructure and therefore the strategy. And that's got severe knock-on effects. And I know we'll come to this point on Tuesday over the master planning in the SPD of particularly the new settlements. And my final 2 points are that I would draw attention to the parallels of Bedford with the North Essex authorities, where the inspector found that the plan there was unsound based on the reliance of unviable and undeliverable new settlements, which in turn were reliant on new infrastructure that remained wholly uncertain. And my final point is that we consider that alternatives should have been run on both the plan period and in the event that the major infrastructure does not come forward as assumed or indeed at all, in order to see that the implications of those growth strategies and introduce some flexibility into the delays to infrastructure in terms of delivery. As it stands, there is no flexibility, and therefore the overall strategy is not credible, effective, or justified. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Hoyle, please.
Thank you, sir. Alistair Hoyle from Axis, here on behalf of FCC Environments. Just a very brief point to make, sir, please, on the point of flexibility. It's stated within the supporting text in the plan that the spatial strategy provides a framework for the determination of planning applications which come forward on unallocated sites. I question whether it does, but if so, whether it does so adequately to provide the necessary flexibility. I cannot see how the spatial strategy provides a framework for how applications for employment uses on unallocated sites would be considered. Indeed, the Council has confirmed in their schedule of modifications that other employment sites referred to in DS2 means allocation sites. So whilst there are other policies in the plan which do relate to employment uses on unallocated sites, namely 72S, the 2030 plan, and DM8 of the current plan, it's unclear how these relate to the new spatial strategy. There also appears to be no framework against which to consider employment uses on sites of less than 5 hectares, and which aren't captured by 72S. In my view, there should be flexibility built into the spatial strategy through policies DS2 and DS5, which provides a framework to enable alternatives to come forward if the need cannot be met by the allocations, and where the site accords with the principles of the spatial strategy being well served by the road and rail network, and which would contribute to sustainable growth. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And finally, Ms. Adcock, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you. I just want to mop up on a couple of points. I don't want to take up too much time because obviously we've got matter 6 next week. But if I could just clarify for you that in relation, I should say Helen Adcock on behalf of Lands Improvement and the allocation at Little Barford. Just to clarify ahead of matter 6 next week that in relation to flexibility, there is already flexibility within the plan because there isn't a restriction on the new settlements coming forward earlier than East West Rail. And if you look at ED 19, which is our, sorry, ED 21, which is our statement of common ground with the council, paragraph 34 is common ground between ourselves and the council that the site can come forward, development can come forward before East West Rail. So that's point one, sir. Point two is somebody referred to, I think it was Taylor Wimpey, that a junction on the A428 hasn't been modelled in the BBTM. That, sir, is because one isn't required in order to deliver Little Barford. And that's also confirmed within the Statement of Common Ground, paragraph 2.2.4. Third point is that in terms of the widening of the A421 and the table 5.2, Little Barford is not directly dependent on this delivery. So in terms of if you think that's an impediment, it's not an impediment on Little Barford. There is an overarching movement strategy that is identified in section 6 of our regulation 19 representations, which deals with that as well. Like I say, I don't want to take up too much of your time, sir, because we've got a large session on it under matter 6 next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Before I ask the council for further comments, I just had two things that I wanted to raise. So we heard in the contributions there reference to table 5.2 of the IDP, and I believe it was I believe it was Crick who suggested that the table might be out of date or a bit out of date and need revisiting. Is that something the council have given consideration to and a view that they share?
So I'll ask Mr. Shortland to address that, if I may.
Please do.
Certainly. Sorry, I was just having trouble starting the video. It's not something that we've given consideration to heretofore. The pieces of infrastructure and the development sites remain as they are. If it was felt necessary to do it, I'm sure we'd be happy to, but we have no plans to do so.
That's fine. I mean, I don't have a view one way or another on that, on whether or not it'd be useful to update the table or not. Obviously, it's the council's evidence. So if you wanted to go away and have a look at it and come back to me and say we've had a look at it and actually it is a bit out of date, then you can obviously raise that at the appropriate time. The other question I had, I suspect the answer is no, it's just a flag. Is there anything within the existing development plan that deals with sites adjacent to allocation, adjacent to existing allocations, and addresses how those sorts of sites might be dealt with?
I think, sir, the answer to that is not that I can think of, and I'll just check around the team there. I'm getting shaken heads around the room, so not as far as we're aware, but we can check that as well.
I was guessing about how sites adjacent to allocations might also as a form of flexibility, I guess, but there's nothing that you're aware of that exists in your
not that I can think of at the moment, so no.
That's fine. Sorry, if is there any comments you'd like to make in response? And apologies, it straddled the lunch break. I did seek your views on how you wanted to deal with it.
No,
please,
so
please
it's been helpful, sir, because we've been able to, as it were, to divide responsibilities. So I'm going to ask Mr. Shortland first to address the infrastructure implications of what you've heard, particularly in relation to the issue of flexibility, and then turn to Ms. Barnes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I agree with what Ms. Adcock had just said about the junction on the A428. We've spoken to National Highways. One could be provided if necessary. Our view is that probably East West Rail will be looking to do something in that area to access their station, but it's not necessary for part of the local plan. There was mention made of the RIS3 schemes. Work is continuing by National Highways on RIS3. They've identified 3 particular priorities in this area. You may be aware that there was previously something called the Oxford to Cambridge Expressway, which was being promoted by the government. Since that has fallen by the wayside, National Highways and England's economic heartlands have been working on an Oxford-Cambridge connectivity study. That's identified 6 tier 1 priorities across the region, 3 of which are in Bedford, and work on those will go, I believe, quite a long way to solving Central Bedfordshire Council's issues about the strategic road network. The 3 studies cover the A421 on the Felixstowe to Midlands route, the A1 on the London to Leeds route, and the M1 on the London to Scotland East route. Work on those is ongoing at the moment to identify options for congestion relief, and we should be looking forward to receiving that in the next few months. I'll leave Central Bedfordshire's views on the local road network, I think, to specific site matters, but I will come back to that in due course. And then I wanted to say just a little bit about the constraints which are evident on the highway network. What we found when we modelled the 2030 year was that the current local plan 2030 allocations, when built out, mean that the highway network will be fully constrained at that point. Therefore, a step change in capacity is required to allow more growth. And we found that that capacity will be released through the Black Cat to Caxton Gibbet scheme, East West Rail, improvements to the A421 and Wixham's railway station. Allocating more smaller sites prior to 2030 will not increase the available capacity on the existing road network, and allocating more smaller sites would merely redistribute the additional traffic to slightly different entry points onto the constrained network. So when people talk to you about sites which are easily available in villages and could be brought forward immediately, there is no capacity on the road network to allow that to happen. And in fact, the overall amount of traffic generated would be likely to be more than from the allocated sites, as a host of smaller sites would not benefit from the internalisation of trips that is possible within large settlements. For example, peak hour school trips would be contained within new settlements which have their own secondary schools, but for small allocations scattered throughout the borough, all of the children living in them would need transporting to secondary schools some distance away, either by bus or more likely by private car. So in terms of the constraints and the capacity of the highway network, our strategy of directing growth to new settlements is actually far better than the alternative of having small developments in a lot of villages.
And then Ms. Barnes.
I think Mr. Shortland has covered most of the points that came up in the discussion, but just to reiterate what's been said in relation to the infrastructure position, we made clear in the development strategy document that as we went through the process of setting the strategy, and we reference in paragraph 3.26 that point about the fact that there are very severe infrastructure challenges before any development over and above that already planned for is contemplated, so that is a key starting point. And that again, that there isn't a strategy which can be found which does not depend upon these very important elements of infrastructure. Excuse me. And as I said the other day, the paper at 3.3 of the infrastructure paper document E14 makes clear that the same large transport infrastructure was included in testing all of options in all the options. So there isn't an infrastructure free option, if we were to put it that way. So any and every strategy has a serious infrastructure demand to it. So that sets the context for the comments about flexibility, and it's been suggested that there are sites which could be added in, which would effectively, to paraphrase, do no harm. But in the context of what we've just said about the infrastructure, that just isn't the case, especially if an argument's being made for a more bottom-up approach, which then doesn't have regard to these strategic imperatives, and the fact that any strategy will require this important infrastructure. So we don't see our approach as one which is baking in delay. The approach which we're putting forward is to respond to the targets which we have by setting an ambitious approach, and to seek to meet that need in a sustainable way. And as also has been discussed by Mr. Shortland, it's not the case that villagers are, it was suggested villagers are somehow becoming more sustainable in our virtual world. And of course, we're all very aware of the fact that many things, including our discussion today, take place virtually these days. But there are still very many aspects of life where trends and patterns and of living, working have yet to change in a way which would substantiate that argument. There has been some again discussion about delivery rates, but I think that is something that we're going to come back to in detail later on in the examination. So I'm not proposing to discuss that any further at this stage.
Thanks. Ditto viability as well, where we have a separate session, I believe, to cover that in the block 2 hearings. Thank you, thank you for that. So we'll move on to the next item, which hopefully, if I've got my papers in order, I'm obviously lacking in confidence because I'm looking at the council here to confirm I'm correct. MIQ 10, we're moving on to next. Is that a?
That's right, sir, and it's Mr. Shortland who's going to address that.
Wonderful, thank you for that. I am. Included within here, we've already heard from the various, and they've sort of marked our cards in terms of a discussion relating specifically to Little Barford next week. So obviously we've got that to come. But I'll hand over to Mr. Short, please, on MIQ 10.
Thank you. So in terms of impacts beyond the borough boundary, I think these probably fall into just 2 groups. The first is the traffic modelling that's been undertaken, and I'll ask my colleague Ian Stannis to say a few words on that next. In terms of other cross-boundary issues that might have been an issue, such as schooling, green infrastructure, there's actually been quite a lot of good work done on that. There are no outstanding education issues, and working with Central Bedfordshire Council, we have put together a design guide for the Forest of Marston Vale area in the southwest of the borough and the northwest of Central Bedfordshire, which we've both jointly taken through, and that's now adopted policy for both councils. So I think probably the only point where there may be some outstanding issues is around transport modelling. So I'll ask Ian if he could say a few words on that.
Thank you for that.
Sure. So in terms of transport, the assessment's been undertaken using the Bedford Borough Transport Model, which was developed primarily for the purposes of assessing this local plan. Whilst the model covers the whole of Great Britain, there's very obviously little detail in places distant from Bedford Borough. And the key sort of central area of the model is broadly bounded by St Neots, Sandy, Biggleswade to the east, the A507 corridor to the south, M1 junction 13 and 14, so around Milton Keynes to the sort of southwest, and the A45, sort of Rushden, Northampton to the north. Within that, assumptions around where developments are likely to happen and changes to the transport infrastructure have built on National Highways work for their A428 Black Cat to Capstan Gibbet DCO. We took those assumptions and liaised with neighbouring authorities to see if there are any updates or any refresh that was needed of those. So the modelling takes account of growth and transport schemes within Bedford Borough, obviously, Central Beds, Huntingdonshire, what was East Northamptonshire and Wellingborough, Northampton and South Northamptonshire, and Milton Keynes. So the assumptions cover quite a large area around the borough. And throughout the assessment for the local plan, we have looked at flow changes and forecast changes in congestion through delay and what are called volume capacity ratios, so what percentage of the road capacity is used up by traffic across this modelled area, so beyond Bedford Borough. That's detailed throughout all the transport modelling reports that have been provided as part of the local plan, but primarily in section 7 for the preferred strategy that we're discussing, and supplemented by additional detail in appendices A to D of that report.
Thank you. If I could just come back in to complete that. In Central Bed's response to the hearing, their response to question 10, they say, and we agree, that while strategic modelling has taken place, and that is the right level of modelling to be undertaken at this time, more localised modelling will be provided as part of the planning process. And I think a lot of the questions that they ask about specific sites and particular mitigation are something for the next level of assessment rather than for this strategic level of modelling.
Okay, yeah, and I did note that particular response as well. So my question on this is in relation to paragraph 10.2 of your of the council statement, which refers to the SA report. Can you just sort of elaborate on what that says and the link there with the SA report that I should be looking at, please?
Yes, the quick answer is I need a little bit of time to come back to you on that, if that's reasonable. I can do that in the next couple of minutes, but I do just need to have a conversation with Mr. Tidy.
Yep, that's not a that's not a problem at all. Do you want to come back after the mid-afternoon break?
That would be fine. Thank you. Yes.
And we can make a move on that. Thank you. Okay. Or maybe you'll have got contributions people to make on MIQ 10. So are there any contributions that people want to make on MIQ 10, please?
Thank you, sir. If I may, yeah, thank you. If I may, obviously we made some brief comments earlier about cross-boundary impact, but if I may just make a few comments about the sort of cumulative impact of the spatial strategy rather than site-specific at this stage. Yeah. So we won't revisit any of the detailed content of our Matter 5 statement for obvious reasons. And also the argument around certainty of some of these infrastructure schemes that are being promoted by third parties, because that's been covered at length. Our comments are essentially, excuse me, around based on the modelling of the final preferred strategy. So we don't have any further comments to make in the development of the modelling to that point. We're basing our comments on what the preferred mitigation strategy is now for the cumulative impact of the sites. So I guess our first comment and concern is that the package of measures for the mitigation strategy as detailed in document E12, table 2.7, is primarily based within the borough area. Again, some of these schemes are led by third parties with the level of certainty that we've discussed earlier. And there isn't any reference to potential mitigation outside of the borough. And as we mentioned previously, having reviewed the submitted evidence with the submitted plan, we did ask Bedford Borough for some further technical work on specified areas of concern on our network, which they did and was very useful. But our main concern now is that additional technical work is not represented or explained in any further detail within the final mitigation strategy approach. There are two main areas of concern, really. The A421 corridor, as we know, which is one of the main strategic areas of growth. Some of the additional work that was carried out identified, for example, 500 two-way trips related directly to local plan growth, which isn't insignificant in that corridor, and would ordinarily require some level of mitigation. It also identified some impact on localised routes such as the B530, which may serve as an alternative route for the A421. Again, this is all detailed within the appendix to our statement, so I won't go into detail now. Similarly, we had some concerns about the A1 corridor for similar reasons, identified impact, particularly on junctions at Sandy and Biggleswade. And National Highways, as Mr. Shortland referred to, have recognised both these routes in their recent route strategy reports that they've submitted. So these are of critical concern to all parties involved at the moment. And we feel the strategy as it stands and the plan as it stands doesn't make reference to these strategic issues that we are all discussing at a strategic level. So really, in conclusion, I think our feeling is that the plan and the policy, the spatial strategy itself, does not recognise the cross-boundary impact. The technical work may have, but this is then not translated into the strategy and the policy wording. So at the very least, we would look for the cross-boundary impact and the solution to that, perhaps through a extended mitigation strategy, for example.
And just picking up on that, because obviously I've read your hearing statement, which and just so I'm clear on your position, obviously there is a suggestion of a modification to the plan there that includes a commitment to cross-boundary working and things like that. Given what you've just said about the underlying strategy, does that modification do it for you, essentially?
Well, I think it would go a long way to secure the commitment to look at that further. As we know, at this stage in plan making, as Mr. Shortland said, we said it in our own statement, there is a level of appropriate assessment which would then go into more detail as we look at the site specifically and go on to planning application stage. But we feel at this stage, having no reference to cross-boundary impact at all in any of the policy wording isn't really the right way of marrying up the strategy of the Oxcam approach, the principles of England's economic heartland strategy. The policy wording is not mirroring that vision, which includes neighbouring authorities and the impact on them.
So just so I'm clear on your position, because I think it's quite important that I am clear on it. That you're not saying that the plan is unsound because the spatial strategy is based on a model and a body of work that doesn't properly take into account cross-boundary impacts. You're saying that it does, but that hasn't been translated properly into policy, and that the fix for that is, at very least, a modification to do the further work in discussion with neighbouring authorities. Is that
Yes,
the right
that's
representation
right.
of your view?
That is, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So it's just really important that I understood. You were either saying the spatial strategy was flawed or it was okay, but you need to do more. So
I think the point is the issues have been identified, but they haven't been translated into a action that we can be comfortable to say that we could then go on to the next stage of assessment, knowing that that commitment is there.
Gotcha. Understand that. Mr. Shortland.
If it would be helpful at this point, sir, we wouldn't have thought that such a change was necessary. We think cross-border working is part of how we work on these matters, and further wording was unnecessary. But if you believed it was necessary, we'd have no objection to that sort of wording.
Thank you. Noted. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other contributions anybody wants to make on MIQ 10 regarding cross-boundary working? No, I'm not seeing anybody. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is the approach to existing villages stroke settlements. So this, we obviously had a pretty extensive discussion about this under MIQ 3, so I wouldn't expect us to be sort of revisiting and repeating those points in terms of, excuse me, just a second. Apologies, I'm being punished for having something flaky for lunch. So yes, MIQ 4. So again, I wouldn't be expecting to hear the points that we heard in response to MIQ 3 again. But what I wanted to touch on here was the overlap between the Local Plan 2030 and the Local Plan 2040. The Local Plan 2030. So the success of the spatial strategy relies on obviously delivery of the Local Plan 2030 plus whatever is included in the plan. For the policy that triggered this review, so policy 1 of the Local Plan 2030, which refers to delivery of sites brought forward through neighbourhood plans. I believe it's a paragraph, I can't remember which paragraph it's out of. Let me get the paragraph in front of me so I give you the right reference. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Pardon me, I'll have this in a second. So under plan review, it says local plan review may also provide the opportunity to make site allocations in the rural part of the borough if neighbourhood plans have failed to deliver them in the timescale anticipated. So that obviously, on my reading, sets an expectation that at the time that the Local Plan 2030 was adopted, obviously I wasn't part of that process at that time, but at least there was some reliance on delivery through neighbourhood plans. And timescales attached to those. So my question is where in the evidence should I be looking to see what the sort of delivery of rural plans has been like, and that actually they are delivering in line with what was anticipated when the Local Plan 2030 was adopted?
So I'm going to ask Mr. Tidy to start off, and he may have assistance from others.
Thank you, sir. I'll answer your question fairly briefly, as it's quite focused. I will direct you to the development strategy, which we've been looking at, document F1 already today. Appendix A, which is the last few pages, is a table which sets out the status of neighbourhood plans. It was accurate at the time it was written. It is now out of date, and I understand that you have asked for an update on the progress of neighbourhood plans in another session, and we can certainly provide that. But I'll just, even in its state that it is in, it's not that far out of date. It's worth noting from the planning permission status on allocations that planning applications are being progressed on most of the allocated sites. And of the larger local plan allocations or allocations through neighbourhood plans, construction has started at one of these at Bromham. on the first page. 500 dwellings is allocated there. Other large allocations at Sharnbrook and Clapham have live applications that have been submitted and are being considered at this moment. And Great Barford, although there's no applications submitted, there are pre-application discussions going ahead. So this shows that neighbourhood plans are indeed a successful means of delivering growth and have been for the 2030 plan. The amount of development is quite significant, and it will take a number of years for these sites to build out, especially these larger ones. Thank you, sir.
So I had seen Appendix A. What that doesn't tell me is the what's been built out versus what was anticipated when the local plan 2030 was adopted. Because looking at paragraph 110, my reading of that is that neighbourhood plans were an important component of village-based growth at that particular time, and that there was a need to see how they were delivering in relation to the timescale anticipate providing those councillors to application to, shall we say, is my reading of 110. Am I not reading paragraph 110 fairly?
I'm sorry, you broke up there, and I didn't catch all of your question.
So I'm looking here at paragraph 110 of the local plan 2040. So that reads: the local plan review may also provide the opportunity for the council to make site allocations that failed to deliver in the timescale anticipated. So my reading of that, again, is the plan to development in the rural part of the.
I think so. You're breaking up quite a lot for us here, so I'm really sorry, but we are struggling to totally hear your point. But I can hear you speaking now, sir, and it's like we're speaking over each other. So I think we've got a little bit of a problem with the connectivity here. I can have a go at what I think. I think what you're saying is what you'd like us to comment on paragraph 1.10 of the 2030 plan and our interpretation of that. I think that's what you're asking.
Excuse me, Inspector, can I just interrupt a moment? I can take you out of the meeting and connect. I think you're on the free Wi-Fi, and that may be the problem. So I can connect you onto a secure Wi-Fi, and that may make your connection better. Would you like me to come and do that?
Is that to me or the council?
It's you, sir. I think, which
okay.
is yeah.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Yes. Hi there, Mr. Bird. Can you see and hear me okay?
So yes, a lot better now, sir. I'm pleased to say. Yes, it was all getting a little bit fuzzy.
That's good. I don't know what happens with Wi-Fi in the afternoons. I know my house Wi-Fi goes very wrong once the children get home from school and they start using all the equipment. I don't know what the excuse is here, but there we go. Do you need me to go through my
So I think we understood the question relates to paragraph 110 of the
2030
local
local plan 2030. I was trying to get an idea of delivery versus expected timeframes.
Yeah.
So what the expected timeframes were at that time and how that's compared to what's actually happened.
Yes, I mean the debate at the 2030 examination was about the delivery of the neighbourhood plans, their timescale, and Ms. Barnes will just refer that and relate that to paragraph 110.
Yeah, so you asked about paragraph 1.10 in the 2030 plan, and the context of that is that at the time when we had the local plan examination for the 2030 plan, there were concerns expressed that because we were putting forward a plan where the neighbourhood plans were going to contribute to the delivery of the plan, and indeed it does with the contributions from the neighbourhood plans both in key service centres and rural service centres. There was concern expressed at the time that the neighbourhood plan groups would be unable to bring forward neighbourhood plans and to make those neighbourhood plans in order for those strategic amounts which were identified in then policy 4S to come forward. So that is what 110 is referring to, and what has happened since then, as we discussed already in the examination, is that all of the local plans, all of the neighbourhood plans have been made in accordance with the local plan 2030. So the concern about the delivery of those plans has been met. So we can say that all of those are now in place. And as Mr. Tidy said, not only are they in place, but the sites which have been allocated through the neighbourhood plans are in many cases well advanced now, and so they are all going to be able to make the contribution to the reviewed plan as those two parts of the local plan 2030 merge into the 2040 plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. That was. Yes, just one more thing on MIQ4 from me, which is at paragraph 4.3 of your statement. You talk about a potential modification needed to DS2. Let me get that in front of me. And that is to overcome a consistency point, isn't it, with the policy in the 2030. So it's what local plan 2030 says about how development in the countryside will be treated. So remind me which policy that is.
So it's 7S.
7S, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So 7S there, and I think there's a suggestion that you'd need to make a the suggestion that a modification might be necessary in order to achieve consistency between the local plan 2030 and what 7S says in relation to how development in the countryside will be treated. That was an issue that I'd already picked up in my reading. So I think my sort of, it would be a nod of agreement, I think, from me, that's a modification to achieve consistency between the two is necessary. Does the council have any further comments on that or any particular issues with that?
No, so no, we'll note that, sir, and put that in our running list.
Thank you. Okay, that's my questions on MIQ4 is say that there's some overlap with the discussion we had this morning around treatment of villages and other settlements within the spatial strategy. So is any further contributions or any additional points anybody would like to make in relation to MIQ4, please? Yep, Mr. Fagaru, I'm struggling to pronounce your name, sir. I'm very, very sorry. It seems to be one of those names I just can't quite guess. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, sir. It's Favag. It's Favag.
Favag.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Don't worry about
sorry.
it. No, it's fine. A very short point, sir. But obviously we're setting out the local plan that sort of where we are right now. It's not sufficient to meet the local plan 2040 is not sufficient to be meeting the needs of key service centres and rural service centres, because we're looking now through to 2040. We're talking about the 2030 plan, but we're looking through to 2040 and meeting the needs of those communities through to 2040. Return to what you heard under matter 1 from us about the social consequences of not being able to meet the needs of those communities, which we return to and feel is really important. Those needs can't be put off to a future review and need to be addressed now, as you heard under our statements under matter 3 in terms of housing needs. So it was just that point, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I will actually just come back to the council on that very point, because I did have a related question in terms of meeting the needs of sort of rural areas through to 2040, as was just suggested. Obviously, we do have paragraph 79 of the NPPF, which talks about promotion of sustainable development in rural areas. Has the council had regard to that in putting together their spatial strategy, or how has?
Mr. Tidy will address that, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, the local plan is dealing with strategic allocations for strategic growth. In terms of local needs, we have, based on our experience of the willingness of parish councils to bring forward neighbourhood plans, we are encouraged, and we expect them to, if they wish to meet local needs, to bring forward development through their own neighbourhood plans. It's noteworthy from the Appendix A to Development Strategy I was referring to earlier that 2 parish councils, Wootton and Felmersham, have allocated growth to meet their local needs, even though the parish councils that produced those plans were not required to by the strategy of the local plan 2030. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Goodall, please.
Thank you, so I'll try and be as brief as possible. But I think further to your reference in paragraph 1.10, our view is that that paragraph is engaged, and that by, to use Mr. Freer's phrase from earlier, turning off in effect the strategy for the rural areas in no way meets strategic priorities and doesn't contribute to meeting needs through to 2040, and therefore that's inconsistent with national policy. It's the only real point you can pick this point up, sir, but the council's effectively turned off part of its strategy that it says is sustainable. So under your MIQ 17, and in line with what PPG 41101 says, this is the only chance to see whether those settlements have strategic priorities. It's not actually about identifying strategic sites, as Mr. Tidy just said. The plan is about addressing strategic priorities for all settlements. So if that hasn't been achieved by the local plan 2030, and let's bear in mind that plan deferred its allocations to neighbourhood plans, which could not make they could not make new strategic policies, and it wasn't their role to address strategic priorities such as the provision of school places in and of themselves. And therefore it follows that this is the process to review the capacity of individual settlements to ensure both an overall appropriate strategy and a sustainable contribution towards the needs of those particular settlements. And so if the 2 strategies haven't coexisted seamlessly, and our position is that they have not, because the the strategy for some of the rural areas might have been set by the local plan 2030, but it was most certainly incomplete and wasn't complete through to 2040, then this can't be an appropriate strategy without engaging properly with that component of the plan. And just a reference for you, so why we say this is correct, it's table 5 of our 2019 representations report. We would say that what the council has just characterised with reference to the neighbourhood plans is incorrect. Their local plan 2030, for example, and this is what's shown in our table 5, had commencement dates for all of the neighbourhood plan allocations for key service centres commencing by 2023, 2024. The last of those being Great Barford. And as the council said, it's only Bromham which is now already delivering units. And what the council's actually done in its development strategy topic paper and also the stepped trajectory topic paper, even when it drafted that last year, was pushed a start date back for all of those sites. So even Bromham, which has now started, has been pushed back a year. The Great Barford site was pushed back 3 years, and as we've just heard, still isn't subject to a planning application. And yet the topic paper from last year said first completions in 2026, 2027, which I think is highly questionable, sir, in terms of whether that now will even be achieved as it was drafted as a pushback last year. So both the rural areas and the town centre sites that we've already discussed have effectively been pushed back as far as they can be beyond 2030 and into the final step of the trajectory. And that's effectively what pushes you away from an appropriate strategy and away from, as the council has conceded, any flexibility. And that's why paragraph 1.10 and the preparation of an updated strategy and list of priorities for the rural area should have been engaged with. And the council said in its own initial assessment of those sites, some of those would have had the very positives that are necessary or beneficial to deliver those priorities. We're not suggesting a wholly different strategy for the council, although we are suggesting there are fatal flaws to the SA process to get them there. But were you to engage with modifications, sir, it wouldn't be our position that you'd end up with a different strategy at the end of that. You'd end up with an appropriate strategy to fill what's effectively a missing piece of the requirements of national policy. And this is the point, sir, where I've taken sort of a bottom-up approach to this submission. I'll be as brief as possible, but obviously we're representing Meridian Trust today, who are the operators of Lincroft Academy. Recently transitioned from a middle school to an upper school, or secondary school, full 11 to 16 intake. That wasn't addressed in the local plan 2030. It couldn't have been addressed by the Oakley neighbourhood plan, although our client secured modifications that said that there will be pressures related to the increase of capacity of that school, vis-a-vis highways, etc., that need to be acknowledged in the future and will need to be treated positively when applications come in. We throughout have had an objection to and this is not a site-specific point, this is an infrastructure evidence point, where Lincroft Academy, Meridian Trust, is actively involved in discussions with the council that school will be increasing to a 240 pupil allocation number to accommodate growth, which is covered in the local plan 2030, which is currently unfunded. Now, the council in its evidence, all it's come back in response to those representations is saying that there is a surplus of secondary education across the borough. They've never come back and put on the record that there aren't proposals to increase the pupil allocation number of Oakley. And indeed, the school capacity forecast that we've included in our statement shared with Meridian Trust show that exceeding 240 over the plan period based on committed growth in the neighbourhood plans. That, sir, is the starkest illustration to you as to why this plan should at least make reference to that expansion within its evidence base for you to conclude whether an appropriate strategy with regards to Oakley, whether it should have been reassessed as a key service centre or rural service centre. It's work that simply hasn't been done as part of this process. And again, it's not an omission site really point for you, sir. It's the only way I can pick it up under this submission as to a very clear example of how individual settlements should have been assessed in the strategy making process.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any other contributions on MIQ4 before I ask the council for anything they want to say in response? No, I think just to sort of set out where I am on paragraph 1.10. So in relation to, obviously that was something that set out the purpose, the reason for the review. It's sitting behind it. I think I need to reflect further on how the plan responds to paragraph 1.10. Could to help with that view, and obviously bearing in mind what Ms. Barnes said, I did note, but I think it would help my consideration of that if I did have a note from the council just addressing that particular issue, if I could do. Is that something the council are able to provide for?
So yes, I mean, we thought it'd be helpful to do that note and also perhaps update the appendix to the delivery strategy topic paper, so you've got the most up-to-date position in terms of progress on the allocated sites. Would that help?
Yep, that certainly would help. Is there also evidence as well that was presented when the local plan 2030 was examined that sets out what the council's understanding at that time was about the timescales anticipated for delivery from neighbourhood plans? So I get a feel for what the understanding was at that time.
Yeah, so we'll look to see what's still available in relation to the evidence for that, and we can feed that into the note.
See what's sitting at the back of the cupboard. Thank you for that. I think that's how I'd like to deal with that issue and just reflect further on Para 110. Okie doke. So moving on to item number 5. So that's the needs of different employment sectors. That's MIQ 16. And again, very much like the previous one, we had a discussion, a quite extensive discussion yesterday on the needs of different employment sectors when we looked at the employment land requirement. So it's actually addressed the questions that I had on this particular issue. So I'll just ask the council to set out their response, and I'll go straight to other participants on that one, please.
Mr. Tidy again, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll just briefly introduce the item really, because the employment strategy is reflects where most of the employment development already is in the borough, which is mostly in and around the urban area and along the A421. And the strategy of the plan reflects that and continues with those locations. And that's for simple reasons that those are the most sustainable locations, and because of the accessibility to the strategic road network, and qualitatively the most attractive locations for businesses. And I think we referred yesterday to the qualitative requirements for allocations in the employment land study at paragraph 9.11. The most notable one of those criteria is about accessibility to the strategic transport network. And of course, such a strategy also avoids putting extra traffic onto minor roads, particularly village roads. So the strategy is to put growth around the urban area or in the urban area and along the A421 transport corridor, which is the overall strategy for the plan as well. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. And of course, looking at your statement, you do refer to both the employment land study and also the ACOM review, which was the ED13 documents. I've noted those, and obviously we kicked those two pieces of evidence around quite a bit yesterday. So I don't have any further questions on those, but I will open the floor up to anyone who wants to make any contributions on that. Mr. Cairns, please. Oh, I think you're on mute. I can't hear. Mr. Bird, can you hear Mr. Cairns? Yep, Mr. Cairns has.
So, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
We're working. Hang on.
Oh, but you've got an echo.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. We're working on two computers. I have I was going to say a split personality on the basis that Mr. Robinson is next to me and I'm using his computer for the microphone, but mine for the picture. So here we are. As you have already indicated in your introduction to this particular matter, we discussed a lot of this yesterday. I'm not going to repeat at length what was canvassed yesterday morning. This question itself, however, of course, is, I note, reflective of paragraph 83 of the framework. And so far as the spatial strategy is concerned, the simple answer to the question you posed is really not demonstrably so. And the reason for that is the location of Bedford at the heart of the Oxford and Cambridge arc, and the locational needs of the life science sector. And just very briefly, I'd like to remind you, I'm not sure we looked at this table yesterday, but I'm looking at ED13. And ED13 at page 30, it's the ACOM Vega. And it points to the life sciences as a component of the innovation sector. And an interesting table, an important table, demonstrates how the life sciences and healthcare element formed in Bedford some 11% plus of the entire growth of science and technology within the Oxcam arc. So that in itself points to the significance of this sector, although in fairness, as Mr. Tidy yesterday made clear in his opening statement, the Council's aspirations are clearly to, and ambitions are clearly to capitalise upon this crucial sector. It's already established as a sector. It's already growing, as we can see from that table at 3.2, that it amounted for over 10% of the growth in the last 5-6 years. And of course, in that context, there's been much made of the EWR announcement and the proposed new section there. And that was also expressly referenced in the Treasury's Life Sci for Growth statement, which was released the same day as the EWR alignment announcement. And so it might be helpful if that could be made at some point an examination document, because they cross-refer, and in particular, going to the Treasury statement, that expressly recognised the government's ongoing commitment to what it described as the transformational new EWR between Oxford and Cambridge, and the region's global renown as a hub of science, research and innovation, and how the railway will support that government's commitment to this sector. Now, in those circumstances, bearing in mind the Council's aspirations for the innovation, including life sciences sector, it was perhaps disappointing to see that the expression life sciences appears only once in the entirety of the plan. So going back to my original answer to the question that you posed, not demonstrably so, does the spatial strategy appear to discharge the needs, or demonstrate that the needs of particular sectors have been, locational needs of sectors have been properly realised or demonstrated. Now, two points arise from this that we say is important. Obviously, you know, our site is particularly well located within the borough, And insofar as the connections to Cambridge are concerned, it's very much important, we would say, to note the connectivity to Cambridge. Again, specifically referenced was the Cambridge biomedical campus in the Treasury statement, which happens to be a Prologis site, but that's incidental. But it's to the east of the borough, and that could link with the A428. Now, this sector is going to, as I understand the council's ambition, to align with its overall strategy to encourage such development as this. And again, not to repeat what we said yesterday, but there is the opportunity to afford flexibility to ensure that those locational needs of this important sector are met within the ARC. And so far as main modifications is concerned, that could, of course, identify those locational benefits and criteria in terms of integration with the life sciences and R&D sector, along with the excellent accessibility to Cambridge and elsewhere in the ARC. More to the point, it would align with the council's overall strategy with regard to employment in any event. So, as I said before, I'm not going to repeat what I said yesterday, but that is how we would bring to you. So there are concerns with regard to the spatial strategy and in the answer to the question that you posed at matter 5.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other contributions on MIQ 16? No, so if I just ask the council if there's anything they'd like to say in response, please.
If I could speak, if that's okay, sir. Patrick Lyons from the Economic Development Department of Bedford Borough Council. In terms of life science sector and our aspirations, again, as we, not to go over everything we spoke about yesterday, but we talked about some of the subsectors we've got locally around sort of medical diagnostics, etc., and where we see real opportunity for growth, and which we're really, proactively trying to make inroads with industry to get Bedford on business end users' radar, and why we should be the right location for future investment and future growth. And in terms of the sites selected and that we envisage coming forward for this use, for these high value business park, innovation campus type environments, proximity to the A421 is obviously key. That access to the road infrastructure, what works for other sectors works for those sectors that we want to grow locally. But I think it's the proximity to the main urban area and those sort of active travel routes which is really sort of driving a lot of that thought as well. If we're always sort of using Cambridge as a benchmark to some degree, and we're wanting to sort of see more sites come forward that achieve that value locally, and how do we sort of foster and create that environment? So again, not too much density on the sites, a productive, creative, innovative type environment for high value employees to get in and around and work to. And with that is the access and the travel routes to it. So it's important that sites close to the main urban area where folks can drive to, but where they can use public transport, where they can cycle, and where they can walk to work as well. We've seen that on our Premier Business Park at Priory. That works quite well there. It adjoins Priory Marina, and yeah, that's say some of the vision and aspirations for some of the sites selected to come forward in this plan as well. Thank you.
So in response to the question of whether or not you've considered the locational needs of the life sciences sector, is the answer to that yes, or okay?
I think yes, sir, yes, with a thumbs up apparently, sir, yes.
with particular enthusiasm. Okay, yes. Well, we'll leave that one there for me to consider further. What I'd like to do now is just take a very brief break, just to grab a cup of coffee and everything. So if we take a sort of short 15-minute break, 10-minute break. Councillor, are you okay with 10 minutes?
Yeah, happy with that. So 10 minutes is fine, sir, if
yeah,
that's okay with you.
Thank you. Hello there, can I be seen and heard? Thank you. Hello, Mr. Bird.
Hello, sir.
Okay, let's move on to the next item after that short break. So we're on to MIQ. Sorry, Mr. Bird, you want to say
before you do that, you did have a query about paragraph 10.2 of the council statement of case and the SA, and Mr. Shortland can give you the answer to that.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you for giving me the time to consult Mr. Tidy.
No problem. Thank you for reminding me.
He's pointed me towards paragraph 11.12 of the Sustainability Appraisal Report, which talks about the other cumulative and synergistic effects identified in relation to growth in neighbouring areas outside the borough. Includes housing and employment growth allocations in the east, close to St Neots East strategic expansion. It notes positive and negative effects, and these are summarised in the assessment on Appendix 9, page 200.
Wonderful. Thank you for that reference. So that was Appendix 9.
Yes, page 200.
Thank you, and I can read that at my leisure. Thank you for that. Okay, let's move on to item 6 on the agenda now. So that's around water resources, looking specifically at MIQ number 12. I just asked the council to sort of kick us off on that one, please.
Yes, I'm going to turn to Ms. Wilson on this one, sir.
Thank you.
Ernest. So, beg your pardon. Misled you. It's Mr. Draper.
Thank you.
Thank you. The council engaged with Anglian Water and the Environment Agency very early on in the process. Our duty to cooperate statement, which is document sub 10, starting on page 32, sets out the cooperation between the three of us, and sets out some of the stages there on what was discussed. So I won't necessarily repeat them at this point. In terms of how we've what's the word I'm looking for? Considered the water resources. During the site assessment process, the information that we had at the time was that largely the sites that were looking to be allocated in the plan could be accommodated both in terms of water resource or water provision and in wastewater. So we worked on that information as we've alluded to, I think, in past information moves on, and it's very recently that we've been made aware by Anglian Water that both the water provision and the water recycling centre capacity is probably more strained than anticipated. I've noticed that Mr. Sweetland from Anglian Water is on the call today, so it may be that he would be a good source of information on the specifics. What we do know is that there are projects in place that to address water resources, including a pipeline that is being developed to go from the east side of the Rutherford zone, which is the water zone that we're in, where there are areas of water surplus into the west. West to east, I beg your pardon, which is more water constrained, and that will benefit Bedford. And there's also 2 strategic reservoirs planned in the 2030s. I think that's all been set out in the statement. I think it's pertinent to point out as well that to 2030, the growth in the plan largely comes from the sites that were allocated in the 2030 plan, and that was assessed as part of that, and the requirements of those sites were assessed as part of that process and the adoption of that. And then we see the step from 2030 onwards, at which point the strategic projects that are being trailed by Anglian Water will be much more advanced and be able to provide those resources. If I can then just address the point about the Environment Agency's representation and draw your attention to document ED30, which is a statement that has been agreed between the Environment Agency, Anglian Water and Bedford Borough. The Environment Agency sets out as part of that it is broadly confident in the ability of the water company to maintain supplies without causing growth in abstraction, which will be achieved via demand management measures prior to alternative supplies coming online, the ones previously mentioned. And Anglian Water maintains the position that water and water recycling capacity can continue to support social and environmental prosperity. The Environment Agency has also set out in that statement some points that it considers prudent or pertinent that would lead to it being able to withdraw its current objection as well, which, as far as I'm aware, the council is quite happy to agree to.
Yeah, and those all require modification to the plan.
They would, yes.
Okay. And it's the council's view that they're all, I think they are all main modifications rather than additional ones.
Yes, I think so, sir. The full commitment, the first one is a full commitment to undertake joint evidence-based work through water cycle study. Again, I'm not sure the level at which of a modification that would be required, but certainly the second 2 points I think would require main modifications. The council has also included in its allocation policies in the plan the requirement for the developers of those sites to engage Anglian Water early to discuss water provision and wastewater recycling.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's a helpful overview. So thank you. So just to take those two issues at a time. So on supply and recycling. So on supply, we had the statement of common ground, which is in sub 10, which is with EA and Anglian Water, which talks about how sort of future growth would be reliant on the delivery of sort of a couple of sort of national projects, one around piping, one around reservoir capacity. We then obviously now have ED30, which I understand is also relates to supply, that confirms that that they remain confident that residential growth can be accommodated, but they're feeling a bit shaky or not sure at all about non-residential growth. So they need to put in the modifications that you talked about to deal with the issue of large-scale non-residential users and dealing with those. So when planning applications are put in, that there's been adequate consideration and all that kind of stuff. So that's my understanding of what's happening on supply.
Yes.
And there are the three modifications for me to then consider that flow from that, no pun intended. The next one is around recycling capacity. So again, in sub 10, which you've drawn my attention to, my understanding was that the spatial strategy and the future growth in Bedford was predicated on there being an upgrade to the Bedford Waste Recycling Centre, which at that time was subject to permitting with the intention of something happening around 2025. We now have the statement ED32, which I presume you've seen yesterday, which came to me yesterday anyway. This is all on the examination library now. So that gives me a slightly more pessimistic view, saying that the plan 2025 timetable for the upgrade has been, I hate this word, reprioritized. We can hear all about what reprioritized means, but what that ultimately means, and looking at that statement, I look down it to see what it's been reprioritized to, and I see the immortal words TBA, which make me feel even more shuddery, shall we say. So it's but looking at it, it is still a scheme that's planned to accommodate future growth into the mid 2030s. And what it says there is, or what I'm reading from there, is that until that scheme is put in place, that the only confidence they have is around smaller scale development, and everything else is likely to draw an objection. What's the sort of what are the implications for that for the plan? I mean, obviously it's a very recent statement, so it'd be entirely reasonable for the council to say we need to think further on it. But what's your sort of, do you have any thoughts on it in the first instance? I think I understand the position on supply and the 3 modifications. I can take that away and think about. But obviously the issue on the recycling one looks a bit trickier to me. So what's your response?
Initial thoughts are that just to return to the point that growth to 2030 has been assessed as part of the 2030 plan, those being the sites that provide a lot of the growth to that point. The growth after 2030, it's something that I think we probably need to consider a bit further. But the fact that the investment, whilst it has been pushed back, Anglian Water have intimated that it would still happen early in the 25 to 30 period. So whilst it's kind of not in the 24-25 period that had initially been put into the statement, it's still within the realms of being able to provide the water recycling capacity that would be needed for the growth after 2030. Again, I would refer to perhaps Anglian Water and Mr. Sweetland if you would like to add to that.
Yeah, should we sort of open the floor up to the participants of this, as we do I believe have someone in from Anglian Water. Hello there.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Dal Sweetland. I'm the Spatial Planning Manager for Anglian Water. I have with me my colleague Jeff Darch, who's our lead on water resources. So if I just take the 2 issues in hand, and Jeff will come in and be able to answer any detailed questions you have in relation to water resources. So just to recap, this is a joint statement that we made with the Environment Agency in terms of updating the planning examination. On ED30, I think the main points which Jeff will probably be able to add to are, we have set out that we have a regulatory requirement to meet domestic water supply. And in order to do so, because we're in a water scarce area and because we have reducing water resources, at least in the short term before those reservoirs come on stream, we've now had to take a policy position, and that's a policy position that's been agreed earlier this month, to limit our ability to say yes, essentially, to significant new non-household or non-domestic business growth. And we're already saying no to a number of new businesses that have come to us in the past month, because we aren't certain that we can, at this point in time, not deliver that supply and not compromise domestic supply. That's the position we've taken. That's the non-household position statement we've taken. Alongside of that, as part of our water resources management plan, which Jeff leads on, we are developing water efficiency as a way of demand management. And that's something which we're leading on nationally with the Environment Agency and Natural England, to make sure that we're moving beyond the current building regulation standard of 110 litres per day per person within residential properties, but we're also expanding that out to non-household properties as well. So that's the position we've set out in the submission ED30.
Yeah, so just to pause on that one there. So what I heard there was that the policy position is about sort of switching or sort of pushing priority towards residential provision by managing non-residential in the way that you set out, and that the modifications that is been set out in ED30 are part of that, of delivering on that policy. Is that correct?
That's correct. We support the Environment Agency in taking those modifications forward, and pleased to see that the council has agreed to those modifications. So yeah, that helps us in delivering our responsibilities as a water company. Anything you'd like to add to that, Jeff?
Yes, thanks, Dal. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, brilliant. Yes, so just to add, and just to be really clear, so the housing projections that the council had previously are included in our current WMP, and the latest WMP that we're producing at the moment, this is the Water Resource Management Plan, includes the position as of 2023. As Dahl has referred to, we have a legal obligation to supply for domestic purposes, so that includes all residential properties, but it does also include non-residential properties where the water is for domestic use. So, for example, hospitals and schools would fall within that category entirely, but also, domestic elements of, say, offices and even industrial facilities. Where we don't have that obligation is say for large scale, industrial use of water, food and drink manufacturing, that kind of thing. And it's that element which we're having to effectively look very carefully at any kind of applications which come our way for that, given the sort of setting that Dahl set out and our legal obligation to prioritise water for domestic use. So that's the position that we're in as things stand. And as Dahl said, the big, yes, we have got some new resource coming into this area, particularly in the mid to late 2030s. The biggest opportunity we've got to free up water in the meantime is via demand management and particularly water efficiency. So we're doing a lot of work installing things like smart meters to help customers understand where they might have continuous supplies. But we're very keen for local planning authorities and developers to play their part in that as well, through standards such as set out in ED 30.
And the policy position that Mr. Sweetland set out there, is that set out in any published document that you can refer me to or provide, or is there any published document that helps sort of justify this sort of approach that you're setting out for us today?
Yes, we've. We have an internal policy position, but we have a kind of an external version of that we've now written, and we'd be happy to share that with yourselves.
If you could provide that, we'll probably supply that as an examination document for people.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for that. So that was the position on supply, and again, it's for me to consider the sort of necessity for that in sort of soundness terms. Just so I understand, if I were to take the view that wasn't a necessary modification to the plan, what would the consequence of that be?
I suppose from a water resources point of view, ultimately we may be in a position where we have to decline to supply to new development, and that we have the right to do that. So we could just be in a situation where we're seeing non-domestic requirements for water unmet, essentially. Now we encourage developers to talk to us as early as possible in the process to avoid any kind of abortive work, but some are not aware of the kind of challenges that we face, and therefore they get that news at a fairly late level. But ultimately, as I said, we don't like doing it, but to protect our obligations and including to the environment, we would and will and have done in other places declined to supply.
Yeah, and of course we have EA's position. Obviously, EA aren't here today, but they obviously have a holding objection that presumably would remain if the modifications were not applied as well. As I don't want to put words into their mouths, but
yeah,
I will. So should we move on to the position on recycling, please? Mr. Swing,
yes,
I very rudely cut you off when you were moving on to that, but I just wanted to be clear on supply first.
No, that's fine, sir. Thank you. So we've had, again, the joint submission with the Environment Agency, EV32, and this is an even more recent change to the position. Up until about a month ago, we were proceeding on the basis of a £10 million scheme to upgrade the Bedford WRC wastewater recycling centre. That's now had to be reprioritised, to use that word which you may not like, but that's the position we're in. We have limited resources and we've had to reallocate that funding to other projects, including the strategic pipeline that Mr. Draper referred to earlier, which is bringing water from the north of the region down to the south of the region. And we're also suffering the effects, as indeed other infrastructure providers are, with construction inflation. So that's also impacting on our ability to fund all the projects we would like to in as quickly as we have set out previously. So that's the change in position in the past month. That is now set out in our draft drainage and wastewater management plan, which was published a week or so ago. So that's in the public domain. what we wanted to make sure is that the Environment Agency were aware of that position. They, of course, will be consulted as part of that plan as it moves forward, and also the council. Our particular priority is to make sure that there is no unnecessary impact upon the water environment. So we take our duties to care for the environment in terms of the effluent that's treated effluent that's coming from our water recycling centres very seriously. So we work very closely with the agency on that. And we would support the position in which they've taken in the joint submission, that if in the event they consider that applications which have come forward are going to potentially result in a degradation of water quality, then they would lead to an objection. That is their position in which they can, of course, take. What I can say is that the sooner that a plan is in place, the more ability we have to prioritise that investment. We're in a position with our economic regulator, Ofwat, where they only allow us to take into account local plan growth, which is in an adopted plan. So if an adopted plan is put in place and we have higher levels of growth, then we can then factor that into our plan. And it isn't just a plan we have to make every 5 years. We review it on a constant basis. So if sites come forward or a plan is updated, then that would reprioritise, indeed push up the list of priorities, investment in Bedford. What we have been able to do looking at Bedford in terms of taking that reprioritisation decision is there, for some reason, there's been a reduction in the amount of flow, the amount of wastewater that's going into the WRC, which gives us some headroom without the need to then invest immediately in that location. So that's why, particularly, the decision's been taken in the past month. We can perhaps defer that investment and put it into the plan post 2025. So that's the position as it stands. More generally, I'll just make a point here that we're working with local planning authorities across our 59 local areas that we cover in the Anglian region. And the discussions this morning around the spatial strategy have been talking about what are the right spatial locations. The work that we've been doing, because we're leading on climate change within the utility sector, has said that actually if you want to look at the most sustainable locations for growth, first of all, use the headroom infrastructure that you've got in your infrastructure. Then you move on to managing that infrastructure as best you can, and only then do you grow it in new locations. So that would be the approach we would be taking in terms of the WRC, because Bedford is the right location for growth, because there's the potential for that location to be expanded.
Okay.
If you then need to move into locations where you've got existing areas of growth, new areas of growth, then you have an carbon economy of scale, where there is a higher level of development that's needed to meet a certain economy of scale for that carbon. So the spatial strategy discussions this morning, we're supportive of the approach which the council is taking on that.
That's really helpful, and just to sort of get my head around the sort of reprioritization of the Bedford Water Recycling Centre. And of course, I joke about that word. It's obviously I appreciate that things have to be prioritised. But what I heard there is that we currently have the local plan 2030 in place, which obviously delivers sets out growth up to 2030. Should the local plan 2040 be adopted to set out growth up to 2040, that then helps you prioritize the work necessary in terms of the water recycling centre treatment work. So it sort of enhances the prioritization of the project. So there's an element of sort of chicken and egg about this, is what I'm hearing. Is that a fair way of summarising it, Mr. Sweet?
That's correct. So that's the regulatory position. As much as we would like to invest earlier, clearly the Ofwat has got an obligation to look after customer bill payers bills. So that's why they're prioritising investment only when it's absolutely needed and certain to come forward through local plans.
Okay, so in terms of the statement that we got yesterday, and obviously the council probably need to think about it in terms of a little bit deeper, as it was obviously a very recent document. Is there anything in here that I should be too alarmed about?
No, sir. I think the other point I'd make is it's not just about us reprioritisation when local plans are adopted. It's also about when sites come forward, particularly significant local plans. So when those sites come forward through pre-application discussions and particularly through when applications are consented, that again reprioritise that investment.
Brilliant. Thank you for your contribution on that. That's that's the end of my questions. Does anybody have any other and does any other participant have anything they want to contribute on water resources, MIQ 12? Mr. Jenkins, please.
Well, thank you. I'm Paul Jenkins, representing CPRE Bedfordshire Countryside Charity. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. I just got a notification that we might have a fire alarm test in 5 minutes.
Oh.
So if that does happen, don't be too alarmed. So
all right, I'll press on.
Thank you, Mr.
As you
Jenkins.
say, we're not reassured by the joint submission and joint statements, which we believe lack substance and uncertainty on this issue. In our response to the Local Plan 2040 submission version consultation, we did highlight at that time serious concerns about the supply of drinking water and the absence of an effective and environmentally sustainable sewage system that would be required to supply the huge housing target to be delivered over the plan period. Then we found our concerns were shared by the Environment Agency, which has submitted the objections, as you know. I'm sure you're aware of the Environment Agency representations ID 9773 and ID 9774, which state that the 2040 plan is not sound for the following reason. Noting that the development strategy involves substantial uplift of the housing requirement in this plan, they reviewed sections 5.3 potable water and 5.4 wastewater of the infrastructure delivery plan from May 2022. They commented that the IDP doesn't provide sufficient evidence to demonstrate that the proposed growth put forward by the plan can be delivered sustainably and not place further pressures on a water environment already under pressure from abstraction for water supply and wastewater discharges. They therefore concluded that policy DS1S, resources and climate change, and potentially policy DS3S, amount and timing of growth, are unsound as they're not consistent with paragraphs 20 and 153 of the NPPF. As you will know, paragraph 20 sets the baseline, requiring that strategic policies should make sufficient provision for infrastructure for water supply and wastewater. Paragraph 153 requires plans to take a proactive approach to mitigating and adapting to climate change, taking into account the long-term implications for water supply. The Environment Agency representations go on to explain the reasons for the objection, and in short, these relate to shortage of potable water to supply the proposed number of new homes, and the fact that the current sewage system is already operating at capacity and unable to supply current housing stock without seriously polluting the River Great Ouse, let alone cater for any substantial increase in housing numbers. Disturbingly, the Environment Agency made the following comment regarding wastewater treatment capacity. For wastewater, we're concerned that the IDP relies on Anglian Water's now out-of-date water recycling long-term plan 2018. It's not demonstrated whether the proposed level of growth in the 2040 plan has been accounted for in the water company's plans, as well as the in-combination effects of proposed growth in neighbouring districts utilising infrastructure in Bedford. They continue stating it needs to be demonstrated that the delivery of the 2040 plan will not result in a breach of environmental legislation due to the increase in foul drainage generated and discharged via sewerage infrastructure into local watercourses. At CPRE Bedfordshire, we're also concerned with regard to the current local plan 2030 and the following new housing developments allocated in key service centres. We believe that they're not able to proceed due to problems with the capacity of sewerage systems or potable water supply. Firstly, the village of Sharnbrook, where there's 500 new homes allocated. The planning application which relates to this allocation, we believe, is currently on hold due to sewage capacity issues at the Olney Water Recycling Centre. And the Olney Water Recycling Centre has been discharging sewage storm overflows into the River Great Ouse regularly in recent years. During 2020, there were over 4,000 spillage hours from 185 separate incidents. This equates to approximately 6 months of sewage storm overflows. The Environment Agency has stated the only water recycling centre does not currently have the capacity to accept the foul water from this proposed development already allocated in Local Plan 2030. And again, secondly, Village of Clapham, 500 new homes allocated. Plan application there is also on hold, we believe, due to serious issues identified by the Environment Agency regarding Clapham Water Recycling Centre. At present, this recycling centre is unable to safely supply the additional water required by this development. It should also be mentioned that the Environment Agency has stated, getting a terrible noise here. Okay.
One second.
I'll carry on. It also should be mentioned that the Environment Agency has stated, that's the alarm. Yeah.
That should be it. Yep.
I'm nearly done.
Is that it? Okay, thank you.
And can I just the last couple of points?
No, absolutely. Sorry, you take your time. It's
okay. I thought I was being timed out for a minute.
No, not at all. Not at all.
It should also be mentioned that the Environment Agency has stated that water abstraction from the River Great Ouse is currently the maximum permissible, particularly during summer months. We understand that any increase in output at the Clapham Water Recycling Centre would require substantial additional water abstraction from the River Great Ouse. So lastly, some comments on the joint submission and joint statements issued by Anglian Water and Environment Agency on the Bedford Water Recycling Centre. The joint submission published in the Duty to Cooperate compliance statement does not provide confidence that environmentally sustainable solutions can be found with the principal issues relating to water supply or sewage that does not continue to pollute the River Great Ouse. It makes no mention at all of the only water recycling centre issues. The submission concedes that a scheme is being planned to enable Bedford Water Recycling Centre to accommodate future growth in the 2030s. So the proposed scheme is only looking ahead to the 2030s, and no details of the planned scheme have been submitted because as far as we understand, they've not yet been finalised. So recently we've had the joint statements ED 30 and 32, and as far as we can see, they offer very little of any substance by way of reassurance that these issues can be reliably resolved. With this background, to us it's quite clear that the environmental issues regarding the supply of water and sewage to the huge housing numbers included in Local Plan 2040 are far from being agreed or indeed achievable, and at the same time ensure that the water quality of our principal river, the River Great Ouse, is improved from the current very low levels. Water supplies from aquifers are also unlikely to be able to sustain this level of housing growth. So in conclusion, the Environment Agency's primary objective at this time of climate change and the crisis in biodiversity loss is they must ensure high levels of water quality. And this objective cannot be achieved with a massive housing building target central to the Local Plan 2040, and therefore provides yet another reason to doubt that the massive acceleration of housing growth in this plan can be delivered safely and sustainably. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Any other contributions that anyone would like to make on MIQ 12 before I ask the council to any response they'd like to make? No? Okay, I'll hand over to the council for a response on MIQ 12, please.
Thank you, sir. The response is that we have an objectively assessed need that we need to meet as part of the local plan. That's an obligation that we do have to include. We're aware and acknowledge that there are some constraints with regard to water, but there are schemes in place both for the water provision and for the water recycling centre. The Bedford Water Recycling Centre is where the vast majority of the growth, the water from the growth will go. So there are schemes in place to address those issues. Anglian Water are supportive of the strategy that we've set out in the local plan. So I referred to that as well, and that the Clapham and Sharnbrook points raised by CPRE, those sites are part of the 2030 local plan, which has been adopted, and the sites were assessed at that point with the information provided then regarding water resource. So we acknowledge that there is some issues that need to be addressed, but they are being done so through the schemes that are being promoted, and the council have put forward a strategy to meet the demands that we need to meet.
So the Clapham Sharnbrook examples that have been referred to, obviously, that I believe they refer to issues at other recycling centres. Is that correct? So not at the Bedford.
That's yes. In all honesty, my knowledge on those applications is non-existent. So I wouldn't.
But is it correct that there are the planning applications on hold because of those issues, even though they were allocated in the local plan 2030? Is that correct?
Mr. Shortland can help you, sir.
Thank you.
No, that's not correct. Negotiations on both planning applications are ongoing.
Okay, so they're not on hold. They're just subject to discussion around water resource issues and capacity. Is that
amongst others? Yes.
More fairer reflection in your view. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. The other thing, looking at the statements that I have, and I'll need to reread them carefully, as we know we only got one of them yesterday, so you'll excuse me if I haven't read it many times. What I would need to do is just be clear about what it says in terms of EA's position, particularly in relation to recycling. I don't think I read the words in that statement that they're withdrawing their objection to the plan. So I need to understand what EA's position actually is now in light of this. You may have studied the statement more than I've had the opportunity to. Does it say what EA's position is in relation to the plan, whether it still sustains an objection against it, or on recycling grounds? Or is it not that specific?
I believe it's silent on the EA's objection as it refers to water recycling. Document ED30 is the one that gives their suggestions on the water supply side, but there's nothing that I can see in the statement ED32 that talks about anything about their objection for water recycling.
So does the council understand what EA's position is at the moment in relation to the plan, and would it be helpful to engage with them to establish what that position is?
The only point that I can see in the statement there, sir, and what our understanding of the EA's position is in the penultimate paragraph of ED32. It says that the increased discharge rates from growth, if it's delivered ahead of the improvements to the WRC, likely to lead to objections to significant growth. But also, my colleague has just helpfully highlighted that in the final paragraph, the EA, if I may read, the EA understand that delivery of the scheme, which refers to permit application by Anglian Water, if I may ask Mr. Sweetland to clarify what that would be. But the EA understands that delivery of the scheme to allow more capacity to be available to accommodate local plan growth without causing a deterioration in the river status. You understand? Sorry, sir, just reading as I go.
Don't worry. It was produced yesterday, so I can't expect you to. And if as you say, if what you need to do is take an action to think about the statement further and what the EA's position is, that is a completely reasonable position to take.
So I think we do. We'll come back to you, and we'll contact the EA as well, sir, to come back with an update of their position, just to see what they're actually saying would be helpful, sir.
Yeah. And are you clear enough on where they are on supply in relation to ED30 and the modifications they're asking? That was a bit clearer, isn't it?
Yes.
But it's the position in relation to ED32 that's a bit more opaque, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's not helpful at the moment, so we'll clarify that.
Okay, that's I think as far as we can go. I think on water resources, sort of pending that. So we'll move on to item number 7, which is other issues. So the first one I want to consider under this item is MIQ 15 and the council's response to that in terms of not consistently including dwelling numbers or even estimates of dwelling numbers in policies.
So this is Jill Cowie. I think we've touched on this issue already once in the examination, but this is as it were, the agenda item for it.
The actual. Ms. Cowie.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me.
I can.
Good. This isn't a new approach that the council is taking. It comes from our development management team, who asked us some time ago not to put capacities in our allocation policies. And I'm going back quite a way now, so that you will maybe have seen that the Local Plan 2030 similarly doesn't have any capacities in the majority of its policies, and neither actually does the Allocations and Designations Plan back in 2013 when that was adopted. It has no capacities, and we've had the same conversation at plan examination since that time. We've explained in our statement that the issue is that once a number appears in a policy, some people see that as a maximum number and some people see that as a minimum number, and it doesn't seem to matter if we put approximately 10 or 20 or 30 or whatever the capacity might be. People take a pretty fixed view about what that means. So the question is, what's the implication for the plan of not having those capacities in the policy? And actually what it means is that the plan expects the proper master planning of these sites to come up with an appropriate policy for each individual site, depending upon the circumstances. We've done a certain amount of work on the sites so that we're able to put forward numbers in their trajectory. We've already had a little bit of a conversation about that and suggestions that some of those numbers are quite conservative. And as Ms. Barnes explained yesterday, we've not sought to over-egg the capacities because we know that there's more work to do on each of the individual allocation sites, and we would much rather use that process to achieve an appropriate capacity than try and fix a number in a policy before that finer grain of detailed work has been done.
Okay, so as you say, and yeah, I think you referred to the Local Plan 2030 doesn't include numbers consistently, and it's an approach that your council has used for years. The question isn't whether it's wrong or right; it's whether or not it's not doing so affects the soundness of the plan.
Indeed.
I must say, I looked at it and thought, why doesn't it? Was my initial impression, and I put myself in my kind of planning inquiry section 78 hat on, and I've got councils trying to demonstrate they've got 5-year land supplies, and if I had a council that didn't have the numbers in their policies, I'd be wondering, have you thought about it through the sort of 5-year land supply lens, and whether it helps you sort of clearly point to the fact that where you are on 5-year land supply if you haven't got your numbers in your policy? Have you thought of it through that sort of lens?
We've had quite a few 5-year land supply appeals over recent years, and that particular point hasn't, as far as I'm aware, been raised as an issue. I think the work that we do on monitoring and on our housing monitoring position statements has always been the source material for 5-year land supply appeals, and actually it's worked pretty well.
Okay, fine. So as I say, the key issue is whether or not not doing so affects the soundness of the plan. It's not about personal preferences.
Indeed.
So we'll ask other contributors. Mr. Smythe, please.
Thank you, sir. Very briefly, we would invite you to make a modification to allow the minima being provided within the policy for 2 reasons. Firstly, we say that will promote consistency. As it happens, my allocation of HOU 14 at Kempton Hardwick does include the minima within the policy, and we say it would promote consistency to have that for all the main allocations rather than having the expected figures within the explanatory text. And secondly, so we say it would also promote clarity. It means that everyone will know where they stand. It will help the council because they can monitor, and also the provision, and also will be in a clearer position when determining any subsequent planning applications. Finally, sir, just in response to the point made by the council, if the council's explanation was right about maintaining flexibility and not cutting things off prematurely, one would expect that to be shown consistently in the plan. But as I said, my allocation has the requirement built into the policy, whereas some of the other allocations have in the explanatory text. So I say that soundness will be promoted by making that change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Henderson, please.
So thank you. On behalf of Waits, our submission is the plan's not sound unless it identifies the approximate dwelling numbers for each of the allocations consistently. 3 short reasons for that. First one is because of the uncertainty it introduces into the development management process. Draw your attention to paragraph 16D of the NPPF very specifically here. Plans should contain policies that are clearly written and unambiguous, so it is evident how a decision maker should react to a development proposal. But of course, without that number, this plan doesn't comply with that requirement. Because when an application comes in, it is inevitable that the local planning authority will have to assess the quantum. Is that an acceptable quantum? But without an indication, there is simply no way how either the developer or the local authority, or indeed local community, can know how the decision maker will react. There is no assistance whatsoever on that question. Now, document G9 does have some indication, and that I think is the earlier work that has been referred to by the council, but that is not part of any of the policies. And of course, it can't be relied upon by the council as part of the policies because it hasn't been promoted in the proper way as part of the policy, and therefore not examined by you either. So the end result is, when the decision maker, when we're thinking about is it evident how a decision maker should react, the short answer is no, it's not. The second reason is because of paragraph 74 of the NPPF, the need to have a trajectory illustrating the expected rate of housing delivery over the planned period. Well, the only delivery trajectory that you have is in document G9. That trajectory is built on the capacities that were referred to. But again, none of those important capacities are included, or very few of them, certainly not consistently, are included in the plan. You have the stepped requirement in DS3S. But what you need, that's the requirement. That's how the requirement's going to be met on a step basis. That's not the counterpart, which is the trajectory. So again, inconsistency with the NPPF. And then the third reason is that none of the explanations that you've heard today, or which are in the hearing statement, are in our submission robust. The first one that was said in both in the hearing statement and today is, well, there's uncertainty about what does that mean. People might take it as a maxima, people might take it as a minima. Well, the short answer to that is the council have the opportunity in the plan to explain what they mean by the number. Now, our submission is that it should be words along the lines of a figure that is approximately to be expected, leaves a degree of flexibility, but gives sufficient certainty for the purposes of NPPF paragraph 16. But if the council want to take a different view, it can do that, and it can use the plan to explain precisely what it means. The other question, or the other answer that was given was, well, it said that it seeks to avoid future debate. about whether worked up plan applications are policy compliant. That's in paragraph 15.1 of the hearing statement. But that debate can't be avoided. As I've already said, it's necessary for the local authority to assess the quantum and to assess whether that quantum is acceptable. They're actually having an indication, an approximate indication or minimum indication would assist with that debate, which is inevitably one that must be had. And then the other point that's made today and in the hearing statement was about, well, we need to work up the final number more precisely when the application comes forward. Yes, of course, but having an approximate indication in the policy is in no way inconsistent with working up the final number through an application. In fact, it's the opposite. Having an approximation in the policy rather helps you when you're working up your final number, undertaking your master planning process. So we say none of the reasons the council have given are robust, and the only way that this plan can be made sound is by a modification which includes consistently the approximate number for each of the allocations.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Ms. Cower, obviously we heard there, and I think Mr. Henderson touched on paragraph 11D of the NPPF in terms of being clear about how a decision.
16D, to be very clear, paragraph 16D.
Excuse me. Of the NPPF about it being clear about how decision makers should react. Obviously, I've heard the arguments on both sides, and it's obviously for me to go away and sort of contemplate those, think about those. If I were to conclude that they should be consistently included, even as minimums or indication, or however you wanted to express it, would that cause you a great deal of difficulty?
No, if that was your decision, we would obviously go along with that. All I would wish to add is that increasingly we're being asked by government to prepare master plans and design codes to support allocation policies in plans, and a difference between this plan and previous plans is the requirement in our policies to do exactly that, and that's an opportunity for the council to engage fully with the site promoters, with developers, with local communities about the proper planning of the site. So all of that work will have been done either as part of the planning application process or pre-app process. So it's not that the council will receive applications completely cold. There will already have been an awful lot of work done. So in terms of how the council will respond, that work will help to resolve.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Was there anything else you wanted to say in response on this item?
No.
So it's for me to go away and think about. I think on that. I think I'll and what I want to do is give it a fair opportunity and remove any sort of bias I might have in terms of how things are usually done, and actually look at this through the sort of lens of soundness. So I do want to consider the arguments on there really carefully, as I'm sure you'll understand. So I'll revert back on that one. Thank you. So moving on to the next MIQ that I wanted to visit was around MIQ 18, around the sort of distribution of growth. So we're looking specifically here at policy DS 5S. So does the council just want to kick us off on that in terms of how clear it sets out? And I think, yeah, do you want to start by kicking? Is there anything you want to say in opening on this one?
Thank you. In summary, the policies DS2 and DS5 work together, and they are justified by drawing through the conclusions of the development strategy at paragraph 5.3 and the table at table 8 in the development strategy. So the flow of information through from the conclusions of the development strategy, we do believe are clear. However, we are aware that in terms of the additional question that you've asked, we do think that there could be merit in improving the policies by giving a little bit of extra information about how the 2030 sites are going to integrate into the overall delivery during the local plan 2040 period. So we would be happy to provide some suggestions on how that could be done. We think that there's possibly two ways of doing it: either to include a table within the policy which essentially takes the text from policy 4S and gives a table with the corresponding numbers for the strategic locations, or alternatively, a similar effect could be achieved by inserting a table prior in the preamble to the policy. It would achieve the same outcome, but we have thought of those two approaches to your question. We'd be happy to provide something on that if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think the supplementary question, I think probably nudges that I was of that particular mind, and I'm happy for you to sort of go away and consider the two approaches, and whichever one you think looks clearer, come back with that as one that might address the issue. I think the main thing and the main confusion in my mind is, I mean, the component to the overall growth from the contribution from the local plan 2030 should logically sit within there, because at the beginning you say in accordance with policies DS3 and DS4, which both do include the 2030 growth, to then not include it in DS5 feels like a slightly odd omission to me, if you know what I mean. It doesn't help particularly in seeing what the sort of contributions the various bits are. So yeah, I would endorse what you're saying there.
Yeah, we can provide something which illustrates how that could be done as a note following the hearing.
That's very helpful. Anybody else? Anyone? Would anybody else like to contribute on that particular matter, please? So MIQ 18. No, I'm not seeing any hands up on that one. So finally, any other MIQs anybody would like to contribute on that we haven't already touched? Appreciate we've covered quite a lot of ground today, but there might be something else that somebody wants to touch on. And now's your opportunity. Anything anyone would like to say? No? Okay, so moving on to the next item, MIQ 20. So this is considering the modifications, and obviously we talked in response to MIQ 18 about a potential modification there. But if we start in the schedule, the modification schedule, and given that we're on the last item, I might need a second just to grab that. So just give me a moment, just so I have that in front of me. As with most bits of paper, it's gone amiss. I'm just going to pull it up on the internet here. Just give me a moment. Okay, so looking through the modification schedule, we have three here, MM3, MM4, and MM5. MM4 and MM5 are self-explanatory to me. Is there anything the council wanted to say on those two modifications? No. So MM3, so this is the addition on other employment sites. Can council just explain to me what that is, what the purpose of that is, please?
Just bear with us. We're having the same issue with documents. We just got here slightly sooner than we anticipated, but we're getting it sorted.
Don't worry. I think what happens is bits of paper go to the bottom of piles over the course of the day, doesn't it? Yes, so it becomes harder to find things.
Exactly that. So we're nearly there. I think it'll be Mr. Tidy when we are.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, I apologise for the delay.
No, don't worry at all.
The reason is for clarity, because in policy DS2S, as submitted, it refers to development being focused on the urban area at specified strategic locations adjacent to the urban area and at growth locations within the A421 East-West Rail corridor. And we thought there was a potential ambiguity on what was or could be meant or understood or interpreted as growth locations. And we wanted to clarify that when we wrote growth locations, we meant the sites that we had allocated as growth locations, hence the additional words on allocated sites within growth locations.
So what else could it mean? Or what was the risk there that you were sort of managing? What else could it mean? What else could growth locations refer to?
Well, given that the corridor is linear, has many points on it, someone could try to argue that a point on it was a growth location if they were proposing growth on it.
Ah, okay, yeah, okay, I get you. So it just tidies up the language a bit.
Yes, sir.
Okay, got you on that one. Okay, that's helpful. I can consider that. Looking at the other modifications, obviously we talked about the one at MIQ18. We had the central beds suggested modifications, but we're going to hold those over, I think, to matter 6 next week, and we'll consider those more detail at that stage. At paragraph 4.3 of the of the council's hearing statement, you talk about a modification to DS2S and the criteria at number 7. So that's to make the sort of alignment on development in the countryside and how that will be treated consistently between the local plan 2030 and local plan 2040. So that's making a modification of that nature, which I agree is going to be necessary for soundness. So that's not a problem with that one. And then the other one is at paragraph 8.2, where you wanted to introduce the word more to paragraph 4.3 of the plan. That's in light of your response to MIQ8 in relation to what was that in relation to?
So I think it was in relation to your question. You asked which locations were inaccessible.
Yes.
And we wanted to clarify that it wasn't the intention to indicate that any were inaccessible, and that the policy, the text was supposed to relate to more.
Absolutely. Now, I've obviously got the evidence from you on that, and also from other parties as well. So I've read those arguments, but so that's down as a clarification modification on that one as well. And then of course we've got the EA modifications as well. And the ones that other modifications have obviously been mentioned throughout the session as well. Is there anything that anyone else would like to add on MIQ 20? No. Okay. So that, unless you tell me I'm missing a bit of paper, that brings that brings the agenda to an end for today. Obviously, quite a chunky session. So thank you for everybody's contributions to that. I found it incredibly useful in terms of working through the spatial strategy. So that brings us to the hearing sessions to an end for this week. We'll resume next Tuesday in person to consider matter 6. So that brings this particular hearing session to an end, though. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.